Now, when we talk about race relations in Singapore, you need to first understand historical perspectives. What was race in Singapore? How did we start? And how did we define these race labels? And one of the things we cannot run away from is to understand that race labels and race relations, even in our politics, were very much part of our beginning identity. They were the building block. There was lots of regulations and management, mostly to ensure control of a very diverse young nation. Now, what about young people like you? You need to ask yourself, so what has this got to do with me? I may be more liberal. I may be in a more modern Singapore. So how do race relations and race labels affect me? Now, truth be told, all of us have a part to play, and all of us are actually involved in this. From the time you're born, for most of us, not all of us, but for most of us, we need to actually indicate our race labels in our birth certificate. And as we grow up, when we enter primary school, for example, even kindergarten, we need to indicate our mother tongue language. And for most of us, the mother tongue language is closely associated to our race identity. And then comes the time when you're in secondary school, and time comes when you make your IC, you need to indicate your race status and race label in the IC as well. And just when you think it's over, at 21 years old, when you're old enough to vote, you realize we come back again and we're exposed to these dynamics of race in politics. From the GRCs, where we have minority representations, right down to the last presidential elections in 2017. Race did play a factor in our elections. And then when you decide to get married at the age, and you need to apply for an HDB flat, again, you realize you will come across the importance of race labels in our life. When you choose an HDB flat, it's highly dependent on the quota system or the EIP, Ethnic Integration Program. Some of the things we want to ask yourself would be, how do I understand race and ethnicity in Singapore? What is the prevalent attitude that governs race and policies in relation to ethnicity? And ask yourself, these labels, for example, CMIO, and they're getting more diverse today, right? Do they actually divide us, or do they actually help to integrate us as people and a nation? Now, of course, when we talk about policies, race relations, we have to take into consideration opponents' perspectives. Do not forget, as part of general paper, we need to play devil's advocate. So in the last presidential elections, we had opponents who made claims such as, was there a need for a race-based elections, given that only 3 of the last presidents were from the majority race? So what was the rationale for the race-based elections? Now, today's session is not to provide you with answers, but today's session is to help us challenge stereotypes, help us challenge what we have not been able to understand, the need to be informed, the need to be more discerning, and of course, the need to be more critical today, especially in the age of very liberal media. And this platform here is to help us today to be more exposed to broader perspectives, and that's why we have specialist panelists to help us enlighten us with their knowledge as well. Now, when we talk about the politics of race in Singapore, the 2016 and the 2019 IPS study actually informed something quite disturbing for us, which is, are we actually race blind? Data showed otherwise. And I think Dr. Matthew Matthews later will be a much better person to enlighten you on this. But the layman will tell you this. Guess what? In Singapore, we are not race blind. And this statement was again mentioned by, back then, Mr. Heng Swee Keat, who actually made this controversial statement that Singapore may not actually be ready for a non-Chinese leader. And the IPS data just went on to support that. And the PM also mentioned this. If you look at the last line there, he mentioned there was a need for us to protect certain race labels, especially in participation, presidential elections, leadership positions, meaning the question I had to ask myself is, why? Is it because we need to be regulated, or is it because race lines need to be defined and regulated by the government? So questions we ask ourselves is, can we be free of racial or ethnic labels? Can we break out of these models and labels? But guess what? If you look around you, you would realize that a lot of our policies are race-based policies. Now, in case you have not experienced some of these policies by yourself, at least we come to an understanding that it is critical in how we manage ourselves and our people. And of course, we have certain challenges. Last year, at the start of home-based learning, this article by Straits Times created a little controversy by again going back to racial stereotypes that were not well received by the people. We had other issues, even foreign media, who were concerned about unethical and unhealthy racial practices and divide in Singapore. And Rice Media also ran this article about the race divide in our schools, which I thought was something very pertinent, and which again is one of the reasons why we have this forum, to call students from the various demographics to come in and challenge whatever has been stated so far. Are these stereotypes, or are they the fact that you have been experiencing in this country? And then we draw the line. So where do we stand right now? Are we accommodating of one another? Have we come to a compromise? Are we just tolerating one another, or have we come to a level where we are in acceptance of one another? Where do we stand? And for the rest of the forum, some of the questions you may want to ask yourself would be, so what should our attitudes be towards race and ethnicity? Should we embrace our respective race identity, or should we seek to be a more homogeneous society? Should we protect and preserve our identities, or should we promote a more dominant national identity, the Singaporean identity? Of course, we can always question what is a Singapore identity? And of course, how far should we accept our differences? Now, that would be the overview of what the forum would like you to think about.